Okay. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's wonderful to have Dr. Joanna Kujawa back with us on World Unity Week. Dr. Joanna, welcome back. It's great to see you.
Good to see you, Ben, and good to see everyone. Thank you for being here. I would just, as an introduction, say that I prepared PowerPoint presentation, but I decided against it because I want to have a more immediate conversation with everyone. And also, last couple of weeks, I suffer from acute RSI, so clicking wouldn't be very good for me. So, also, would you like me to start now, or do you want to do something else, Ben?
No, let's begin. Let's begin. Joanna, you've been busy since we were here last. Back in World Unity Week, you've had some great presentations. I think it might have been in the first year where you did a beautiful presentation as well, also on the divine masculine and divine feminine, the balance between them. And since then, you've gone out and written a brand new book. And this is what we're going to be talking about today: the goddesses of Eros, reclaiming our sexual self. So, Joanna, tell us about the work of writing this book and what inspired you to write it.
Thank you so much. So this is actually an excellent question. So thank you for asking. So if you don't mind, that's my soul child. This is the other goddess, Mary Magdalene and the Goddesses of Eros and Secret Knowledge, which is published by SacredStories, actually by Haniel Press, which is the imprint of SacredStories. So I would like to thank both Ben, World Unity Week, and Ariel, who is the publisher for this book. So for allowing me to speak through this book. So I will start with this. Okay, so I will start with a story. Some people may wonder perhaps about my my accent and so on. At the moment, I live in Brisbane, Australia, and I travel a lot. But I was born in very communist and very Catholic Poland, and I was brought up in a very devout Catholic family. And when I was a little girl, I used to go to these beautiful Baroque churches in my hometown, and I saw the images of Virgin Mary, very beautiful images of Virgin Mary. So right from the beginning, I was exposed to the divine feminine. However, I also saw that there was a representation of another divine feminine, but in a more kind of ambivalent way. And it was the representation of Mary Magdalene. And it was very confusing for me because on the one hand, she was supposed to be very close to Jesus. On the other hand, she was supposed to be also a sinner and so on. And we are talking here about, canonical gospels, which I later discovered, Gnostic gospels and other traditions about that. At the same time, and I hope I'm not upsetting anyone here, I'm just being very honest, I was very curious about Mary Magdalene. And I knew that there was some erotic element there that I guess the kind of Orthodox spirituality was not comfortable with. So I started to explore this, I started to look into this at the beginning, not very consciously, but then consciously. And since I was thinking, okay, so there is this woman who was close to Jesus, there's some erotic element, and for some reason she's considered bad in the canonical gospels. And I didn't believe it's true even then. And so I thought, okay, there is this kind of original polarity, what I called the original polarity in our beliefs on sexuality. There is this divine mother that is completely asexual, and there is this, and I'm saying because I do not believe this about Mary Magdalene, I'm just saying how it is portrayed in Orthodox circles, there is this harlot, basically. And I think that it created this terrible polarity in human minds, both for men and women, about what it means to be a sexual person. Either you have to be completely sublimated, this is the Virgin Mary, yeah, I'm talking about my own background, or, it's really bad, which I didn't believe for a moment, right? So I went to look into other examples before I come back to Mary Magdalene, and I know it's not true, right? So I'm just telling you about my confusion as a young woman. So I moved first to Greek mythology, because what a beautiful place to go, right? And I discovered Aphrodite and Athena, and immediately I identify with Athena because, you know, I love the beauty of mind, and this is what she represented to me at that stage, you know, wisdom. But I also was attracted to Aphrodite. And later I discovered that, you know, there is this beautiful hymn to Aphrodite. It's called the Homeric hymn to Aphrodite, in which she's first portrayed as this powerful, full-on, sexual, sexy, powerful goddess. But as the poem goes, you know, she loses her power completely, and her power is being usurped by Zeus. And I started to think that this actually really well represented female sexuality especially, but also our own sexuality. I will talk about men as well. And I really encourage men to ask questions about it too. And because I noticed that from my own experience and observing my other friends, that like in this particular poem about Aphrodite, women lose power very often once they're in a relationship, unless they subscribe to this mother paradigm, right? And then they're also boxed into the mother paradigm, you know, I have to be a mother and or the other woman, you know. So that was interesting. I thought this actually says some truth about our relationships and our relationship with our sexuality. So just to move away from mythology for a moment, I was thinking, how can I explain it in terms which I do it in the first part of my book, which is very personal, in terms of our lives. So I talk about, for example, the romantic trap. How do we actually fall? You know, follow the fall of Aphrodite, so to speak, right? Or the other goddess. So what I call the romantic trap. The romantic trap is when originally people through Eros are, you know, attracted to each other, and eventually, but they do not really they are not really truthful with each other. They try to play parts, you know, because they want to hold on to this original attraction, right? So they always portray the best, you know, the sexiest, the smartest part of themselves, but they really do not reveal themselves to each other. Do we understand? This is what I mean. So for example, I give this example that you can wear the same red dress only that many times for the same man to the same effect, right? It is like we pretend because we love, you know, Eros is beautiful and sweet, you know, and sensual, and we miss it, you know, we want it, you know, that's why we have Valentine's and so on. However, it is partially dishonest. And it is good only at the beginning, and it is not sustainable, not because there is something wrong with romance, but because we are not being honest with Eros and with ourselves and how we present each other, you know, to others, right? To our lovers. The other one, and somebody may get upset here, is the marriage trap. What is the marriage trap? The marriage trap is we just assign to each other roles. And now that's it. You're the support and provider for life, and you're the mother for life, right? So we have these roles, and Eros disappears from our relationships. And I get so many questions from other people who say, oh, how can we sustain Eros in relationships? And I say, well, you have to be honest with each other. You have to be honest with your own erotic desire. You have to express this erotic desire to each other, talk about it. And also, you have to do not agree just to playing societal roles. A woman is a mother, but she's much more just than a mother, right? And women often tell me that, you know, once they marry, they have children, men often even loses or believe that they lost a sexual desire for them, because now she's in this mother virgin box. And other women, the other goddess, like my book, are the attractive women, right? So that's the marriage trap. When we buy into subscribed roles, it's a little bit like the romantic trap, except that, you know, in a different direction. Now, but this is not the only way to be with Eros, fortunately. So another way of being with Eros is the erotic connection. And I collected many testimonies from many people when I was writing my blog. who told me the stories of beautiful erotic connection and how erotic connection is different from the romantic trap, right? So I'll tell you, I'll give you an example of someone. It's not my example, but I hope you'll be able to relate to this. Erotic connection is when you do feel this beautiful pull of Eros towards another person, and the other person feels the same beautiful pull towards you, but you are completely honest with each other. You're completely honest with yourself. You are prepared to bare your soul to the other person. You show your beautiful and your ugly parts. That's a hard work. This is not pretending. It's not wearing dress and, stilettos all the time. It is also, being honest with each other. And I'll give you this example from one of my readers who said, and this is a dangerous path sometimes because, and again, some people may not like it because it goes against societal subscriptions and what Eros should be. Eros doesn't deal with shoulds. Okay. So in this case, both women and men were attached elsewhere. They met, they had a one encounter that completely changed their lives. Through this erotic connection, they had not only wonderful lovemaking, but they felt, and this is part of erotic connection, that they have known each other forever. They didn't know the details of their practical lives, who has a what job and so on, but they felt that they knew each other and they have always known each other on a very deep level. Not only this, hope it's not too much for some of us, it is, they felt that they actually had out-of-body experience when making love. And as the story goes, because they had other commitments, they had to separate, right, after this encounter. And this is not where the story ends. So the woman tells me that 2 decades later, she was alone at this stage already, and she took a course to be a celebrant. And somebody asked her, would you like to perform your first funeral rites? Because a body of a man arrived from abroad and, his family is not here anymore. Would you like to agree to do this? And she performed the funeral rites for this man. And then she read the papers. It was the man with whom she had this experience. So this is just talking about synchronicities, right? And there's some kind of karmic connection, right, there. So this is the erotic connection, but they had a complete opening of the soul, towards each other. Then there is something which I speak in The Other Goddess in the first part, which is called sexual alchemy. What is sexual alchemy? So very briefly, before I move on to mythology and spiritual beliefs, sexual alchemy is the more conscious, ritualistic approach towards this, which means some esoteric traditions, and they exist in pretty much all, on the margins of all spiritual traditions and religions, as esoteric teachings and hermeneutic teachings that use, sexuality for the expansion of consciousness and actually provide us with rituals that we can use. However, I should make maybe a note here that these rituals are not for improving our sexual life, and this is what sometimes people ask me. They are for expansion of consciousness to unite with the cosmic consciousness through the power of Eros, so to speak. I don't know if there are questions now, or should I just move on? Yeah, should I just move on? Yeah, okay, fantastic. So I started because that's why I call myself spiritual detective. And if anything, I am really committed spiritual seeker. I started, and a scholar. So I started to look for the traditions, are there traditions like that? So before I stumble upon Gnostic Gospels, which I discuss in a moment, I first move on to esoteric Hinduism and esoteric Tantra. And I discovered that there's a long-standing tradition which was passed orally from generation to generation of women who were originally called yoginis and then later in Tibetan Buddhism dakinis, who carried on these teachings, right? So, and according to the myth, the first woman who started the school of teaching sexual alchemy for the expansion of consciousness and connecting with divine consciousness, cosmic consciousness, or in Western terms, Christ consciousness, was Arda Triambaka. And according to the story, she was a daughter of a famous sage, Triambaka, and she had a brother, so she was called Arda Triambaka, and she started what is called the, Kula ritual, which is the esoteric classic Tantra. Having said so, just before, if we have some tantric teachers here, it is very different from Neo-Tantra, which is the modern Tantra. It is very different from Chinese or Tibetan Tantra, which has completely different goals. This particular Tantra focuses on the expansion of consciousness through the use of Eros. So this tradition was oral until the 10th century, when Indian philosopher Abhinavagupta wrote his famous work, Tantra Loka, or The Light on Tantras. And in chapter 29, he discusses exactly that, the Kula ritual, which is the use of sexuality for the expansion of consciousness. So in this case, and this is what is sexual alchemy, and again, it is not about improvement of our sexual lives. Okay. Somebody tells me to slow down. Okay. It is not about our sexual lives. It is about, it is more about exactly, about expanding your consciousness, right? Through the use of sexual rituals. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought right now. So in my book, I actually give excerpts from the prayers and from rituals, from the Kula ritual, because the Kula ritual itself is an encoded text. It is an encoded text simply because it was not meant for everyone. It was meant for the initiates. And also it would be looked down upon by, society, so to speak, because it was a very restrictive society. And to some degree, we still live in this kind of society, right? So how do we know it is true? I will share another story with you. We know it is true not only because it is documented by one of the most famous Indian philosophers, medieval philosophers, Abhinavagupta, because before him, this tradition was passed orally only from yogini to yogini, but because when I spent 1.5 years of my life studying Kula ritual with a Sanskrit scholar, a Tibetan monk, and a Swami, we are decoding the text. I had a spontaneous experience of this exactly, which is the complete union with the divine through sexual act. So for me, because I'm not a tantric teacher, I consider it was a one-off, and I considered it an act of grace. However, having said so, I did fulfill certain criteria, and I was already initiated to the tradition. And as the tradition says, what happens, because this is what tradition says, it is that a man needs a woman to experience this. So basically, I had a spontaneous movement during sexual act of Kundalini energy. Kundalini energy is called the life force in Hinduism. And how do I know that it was this? Because it was a conscious energy. It is like something that is you, but it's wiser than you. It's starting to move along your spine and explodes first in your heart, and then moves to the top of your head and explodes there. And it is also a very conscious energy. So it's not some orgasmic energy. It is very conscious energy. You know that something absolutely amazing and special is happening to this. And if this is happening in woman's body, then the same energy starts to spill on the man, and he starts to have the same experience. So that's why this tradition, the Kula ritual, honors female sexuality, because the woman, as they call it, is the ladder to enlightenment through sexual act. So this is Kula ritual. Any questions so far, or should I? As I said, I'm not afraid of I'm not afraid of personal questions. No? Should I continue? Angelina has a question, I think.
Just a quick question. When you say Kula ritual, can you spell that? Is it K?
Kula.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
That's what I thought.
It is chapter 29 of Tantra Loka. It is heavily encoded. That's why I was trying to kind of retranslate it in my book, because we spent a year and a half, reading it with a person who actually translated it, a Sanskrit scholar. But I'll give you an example. It is like Rumi's poems, which in many ways are highly erotic and spiritual. But until Coleman Barks, whoever translated Rumi, it was just like, because they translated the grammar, and it was just like, like, what is it all about? And then Coleman Barks, who is a poet himself and a scholar, was approached by a Sufi leader. And he said, somebody has to give wings to these poems because it is disaster. What's happening with English with Rumi. And he translated with this beauty, erotic beauty and now that's why everybody loves Rumi, because of Coleman Barks.
Yeah, and now it's really beautiful in Canada and other countries. I mean, Canada is that the scholars are starting to take it back because it's been so accepted. The scholars are starting to take it back and do better translations to put back in some of the stuff that Coleman Barks didn't have. So I know that that's a tangent. I'm sorry, but it's just so exciting. Multicultural.
I know, but he just did his part, adding the erotic element, for which he was heavily criticized, because we have this again, when I'm talking about the original polarity, virgin, harlot. This polarity doesn't exist. It was created on purpose, I believe, in our minds. And I will argue to the last moment of my life that it was hijacked. The tradition, the lineage of goddesses were hijacked for whatever reason. And nowadays, we hear a lot about some dark powers using sexuality for power, and they probably do. And why? Because they know it's powerful. So I say, why don't we use it for the good? Because it was meant to be used for the expansion of our consciousness. And for millennia, people were doing this. But perhaps it is a wild, sweet, erotic, and wise and spiritual energy, and a difficult to control for some, when people thought, no, you're not ready for this. And I say, well, if we are not ready, why do we have all of these traditions resurfacing? Why women and men? I must say that men are the most, excited readers about this book, very often. Yeah. Why these traditions are resurfacing? Because we are ready. We don't want to be treated as children. Okay. We are here to honor and claim our sexuality. We are tired of this fractioned, attitude towards you can be either spiritual or sexual, and it creates a schizophrenia. And I'll tell you, because I was in the past a scholar of early Christian church and continue now in a more independent way, I had the privilege of reading letters of desert fathers and so on. And I'm telling you, they were completely often demented because they couldn't deal with our sexuality. So Saint Jerome would say, I don't understand. I am in a desert, eating nothing but one date per day. And I still see, beautifully breasted dancers in Rome. And when I was reading it, I was thinking, perhaps because you're not supposed to suppress your sexuality, perhaps because you are here to use it in a conscious, beautiful way. And I say that from a strictly spiritual point of view, there's lots of talk nowadays about ascension. Do you think you can ascend while rejecting very important part of yourself? You are not going to, because you have lots of growing to do. So I'm not saying that we should, just go around and have sex. This is not what sexual alchemy is about. I'm saying we have to honor our sexuality and use it for what it was meant to be used. Why? It's meant to be pleasurable. Okay. But, we completely misuse it. And I just want to say that, yes, it is a given that men had always more sexual freedom than women. That's given. Okay. There's nothing to argue here about. But men were also not taught how to honor their sexuality. Men are equally demanded by this, what I call original polarity, wife, mother, harlot, the other woman kind of thing, right? So we are all suffering from this polarity. So if there are no more questions, I'll move more back to Mary Magdalene, maybe. So that was my path, and I was happy with this, and I have actually experience of cosmic consciousness through that, which I consider a great act of grace. And then I was invited to go to Jerusalem by two friends with them. And there, in the church of Mary Magdalene, it was Eastern Orthodox Church in Jerusalem on the Mount of Olives, I saw this different representation of Mary Magdalene. She stands there as a figure of power, with her hand extended towards us, with an egg in her hand. And although I know what the medieval tradition talks about, about her giving an egg, I thought, what if Mary Magdalene here actually represents a form of wisdom, the feminine form of wisdom, of divine consciousness that we have forgotten. And before I move to Gnostic Gospels and the Gospel of Mary, I would like to also say that I looked into the lineage. I started to look into the lineage of Western goddesses that were represented in a similar way. And I started with goddess Nimna, which is a Sumerian goddess, which is portrayed in a similar way. She's sitting, it's a very beautiful portrayal, and Joseph Campbell actually talked about it as well in his books on feminine divine. When she sits like that, with her hand extended, with a fruit of life and wisdom, extending her hand towards humanity, behind her, there is an upright serpent, and we can guess what it means, because I come from a tradition of esoteric Hinduism. For me, it represents the Kundalini energy, which is the feminine energy. Other people who do more esoteric research, they say that it may have to do something with our DNA, like the helix of our DNA, and so on. And next to her is also the tree of life standing there, which also represents the portal between dimensions or life and death. Next goddess, I really love her, is goddess Inanna. Goddess Inanna is portrayed in a similar way, with a serpent in her hand, sometimes, which is also considered wisdom or the portal between different dimensions and life and death. Goddess Inanna, like Mary Magdalene also, was responsible for resurrection of herself and her lover, Dumuzi or Tumus, depending on translation. And her priestess, high priestess, Enjuenada, who was a daughter of a king, and she was a high priestess, wrote beautiful poems, beautiful erotic and spiritual poems, in which she channeled goddess Inanna. And I have some translations in my book as well, and they are beautiful. If you can think about erotic poems that are not sleazy, but they're full of sensual beauty, they are her poems, right? So I really encourage you to look there as well. Then we have Egyptian goddesses, Hathor, for example, who is actually, lots of scholars argue that she was a prototype for goddess Isis. That's why at certain stage I like to say, Hathor/Isis. And Hathor is again full-blown kind of sexual erotic goddess, which later was transformed into Isis. And with the arrival of the Roman Empire in Egypt, she was more and more pushed towards the mother archetype, represented with Osiris, her husband, and Horus, the child. And by the way, the Black Madonnas of Europe are portrayed, are exact replicas of Isis representations from early Roman Empire. So this is the Isis with Horus. Horus is facing the world, and the same way the Black Madonnas, she and Osiris and Horus looks actually as a child, but looks adult, meaning it's like a mini man. And the same in Black Madonnas. This is how Jesus and Virgin are portrayed, but there's an argument there that it's actually Virgin Mary, and I'm aware of that. So this is Isis, and Isis also obviously was involved in the story of resurrection, because she briefly resurrected her husband Osiris to conceive a child with him. So so I looked into this Western lineage of these goddesses as well, who are fully erotic goddesses, but also somehow held the key to the movement between dimensions, or between ascension and between death and life. And when I was doing it, actually, as I was going to Jerusalem, I was giving the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. My favorite translation of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene is by a French scholar, former Catholic priest. Nowadays, he's I think, Eastern Orthodox priest, Jean-Yves Leloup. And for me, he translated the Gospel of Mary Magdalene the way Coleman Barks translated Rumi. He actually put life back into this. And there, as in other Gnostic Gospels, I have learned that indeed, Mary Magdalene was portrayed not only as the favored disciple of Jesus, the most advanced disciple of Jesus, but also as his partner. So, for example, in the Gospel of Gospel of Philip, which is a Gnostic Gospel discovered in Nag Hammadi in 1945, Mary Magdalene is called koinonos, which means the partner or intimate partner of Jesus. In all Gospels, such as not all Gospels, in Gospel of Mary Magdalene, in Gospel of Philip, another Gnostic masterpiece, Pistis Sophia, and others, she's portrayed as his favorite disciple. In Pistis Sophia, which is a dialogue between Jesus and his disciples ask 42 questions to Jesus. Out of his 42 questions, Mary Magdalene asks 39. And Jesus answers all these questions, and Peter gets upset. In all of his Gospels, people get upset with Mary. Peter gets upset and he says, why do you even talk to this woman? She's a woman, right? And Jesus says, because it was a misogynistic society, let's face it, right? And Jesus says, Peter, leave her alone, because she's infused with spirit. Gnostics believe, just to round it up, Gnostics believe that Jesus gave 3 levels of teachings. The first level of teachings is included in the canonical Bible, which Jesus gave towards, to teach the simple man living around the Sea of Galilee, right? So the parables, so that everybody understands them. The second level of teachings Jesus gave to his disciples, because they had the benefit of his presence. And anyone who was with a spiritual teacher knows that it's not only the teachings, but the transmission of teachings through energy that is really important. So they had this benefit. And Gnostics believed that Mary Magdalene was the most advanced disciple of Jesus. She was the beloved, right? In some Gnostic traditions, it is said that both Mary Magdalene and John were the most advanced disciples. But in either version, she was, the one that was most advanced. So I do not think personally that it is innocent that she was portrayed as a harlot. As scholarly research shows, the word harlot was not even used even in the canonical Bible once, not even once, and never with reference to Mary Magdalene. Harlot or prostitute or whore is porin in Greek. When even if the woman sinner, and there is no evidence for this, was Mary Magdalene, then the word used to describe this particular woman, who was probably not Mary Magdalene anyway, it's harmatalos, which means somebody who broke law. It could be she didn't pay her taxes, okay? So we don't know what it means, right? So definitely not this. Also, I often am asked this question, why then Mary Magdalene was portrayed and understood as a prostitute? And there are two simple answers to this. One is that in 591, Pope Gregory I either made a scriptural mistake or just didn't like, women, I don't know. He conflated the woman sinner with Mary Magdalene in homily 33. And in 1969, the Catholic Church admitted that there is actually no proof in the scripture for this, that it's a one and the same woman. Plus, this woman was not a prostitute to start with, even if it was her. Next one is, which is perhaps more innocent, is that in the 4th century, there was Mary from Egypt, who was a prostitute, and she converted to Christianity and went to the Holy Land. So I think that what could happen in the medieval mind, they were not strict on facts, but they conflated Mary Magdalene from the scriptures with Mary from Egypt 4 centuries later, who was indeed a prostitute. So it could be one of the explanations. Any questions so far? Because I saw there was something going on in the chat, and I don't know how much time we have. I put on my glasses.
Joanna, you've got about 10 minutes left. And one question was just, you mentioned 3 levels. This is from Angelina. One is the parables, 2 is the disciples, and she may have missed the third level.
The third level is for his most advanced disciples. And he considered, the Gnostics considered the most advanced disciples either Mary Magdalene or both Mary Magdalene and John. Yeah, thank you.
So I have a question. You had mentioned the Syrian goddess before Inanna, and
yes.
I missed who you said that was.
Assyrian or Sumerian goddess Ninma.
Right. Ninma?
Ninma.
How do you spell that?
N-I-N.
N-I-N.
M-A-H.
M-A-H.
Mm-hmm.
Very good.
Thank you.
I just want to say this collaborates a lot with my research as well, which interestingly enough, correlates with the number of crop circles that formed on Mary Magdalene's feast day that informed us of this information. And it's part of a lot of the research that I was doing, that the Kundalini was awakening in her, and we entered into the age of the Magdalene or the way of Mary, which is what we're in now. And so I have fully documented a whole series, so we shall talk or connect.
Yeah, we should talk, absolutely. Good, fantastic. Yeah, and I'm so glad that other people do other research, because it just comes together. Everybody has a unique perspective. I'm just giving my own journey and my perspective. So I'm really glad that, I'm so happy when I hear about something I didn't know about and other people are already working on it, because, the more, the merrier.
Yeah, it just blew my mind when I found out that there were crop circles that were forming on for her feast day that were actually contained information about her gospel.
That's fantastic.
Within the crop circle. So,
fantastic.
And one of them was a crop circle that was related to the awakening Kundalini.
I love it. And actually, many, because I make lots of connections with Hinduism because of my spiritual journey. Yogananda, most people know Yogananda he was also talking that, about it, saying that it is a Kundalini energy, the dispelling of seven demons and so on is basically, we are talking about Kundalini energy. And he said, it's too bad that the West is so opposed, it's been a long time ago, right? We are not opposed anymore, I would say, to this idea, because it will help us to understand a lot from Western scriptures.
Yeah, and this whole notion and idea that she, in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, where she had the vision, and the vision allowed her to know she was one with God. So she achieved the Godhead. She achieved that full expanded state of consciousness where she and God became one, and she knew she was one with all. And that's what's really set her apart. And we've lost the modeling for that.
Exactly.
Because of the suppression, which has just been horrific.
That's right. We lost this model, and in the Gospel of Mary, she talks about it. And the disciples come, as and ask her, tell us about it. And Peter again says, how come she knows this stuff? He just gets furious because he didn't understand half of this.
Right.
So, and how come she knows it anyway, right? Being a woman and all of it.
Right.
So so I think that there was a conscious and perhaps sometimes even well-meant suppression, but I don't like anyone to treat me as a child, and I think we have to be honoring our spiritual journey, and we are all ready now to explore what I called in my book the goddess consciousness, which is this other form of consciousness, in addition to the consciousness that we already have, which is a very masculine form of consciousness, which gave us technology, medicine, we need it, but we cannot fully evolve as, species when there is this other part of consciousness, and I'm not talking about gender here, but feminine consciousness that is completely suppressed for reasons that, we don't know, but it was suppressed, and it is awakening now. And when I talk about feminine and masculine, I mean in Jungian terms from Carl Jung, Swiss psychologist, which means he argued that both women and men have both forms of consciousness, animus, masculine, and anima, feminine. So when I talk about goddess consciousness, I mean that this goddess consciousness is present both in men and women. And we both have to, explore this consciousness if we want to be serious about our spiritual life or our spiritual evolution. Because old models do not work anymore. And I think, and people, are crying, everything is falling apart. And I say, good.
Yeah.
Because we have a now point of building something that actually is harmonious and balanced. And we sometimes go too far in one direction. I do understand. There's maybe lots of anger. I do not understand. But these feelings have to be dealt with, brought into surface, so then we can move on with harmony and harmoniously together. Right?
Yeah.
Because there were past wrongs and we cannot pretend they weren't, and because it makes us uncomfortable, too bad, right? Too bad. We have to deal with this. First, every spiritual teacher of any standing will tell you, take responsibility. So let's take responsibility, and then, we can move on. Both women and men, and again, goddess consciousness is present in men. And that's why this kind of artificial division almost, men's part, woman's part, actually creates unnecessary confusion, I would say. So I don't know, because I could speak more, but I don't know.
There's a couple of minutes left. Let's see if Angelina or Cynthia or Allison or somebody has a final question. Maybe Steve has a final question for Joanna before we complete it. Good luck with the book. It's exciting to be having that out there, Joanna. It's been a very rich discussion. Does anybody have a question. The other goddess. Keep your eyes out for the book. Who's got a final question?
I'll ask a final question. So,
Sure.
yeah, I'm practicing Kundalini meditation as well, and very curious about the role of the yogini and the integration of both Shiva and Shakti energy.
So I love your. Sorry.
No, please.
I love your question. So I explained it a little bit when I was talking, but maybe I was speaking too fast. Is that in this? First of all, it's supposed to represent, from a mythological point of view, the union of a masculine and a feminine, and it benefits the opening of consciousness for both women and men. Now, according to the Kundalini tradition that I studied, which is esoteric Tantra from Kashmir Shaivism, so it's a particular form of Tantra. What happens there, it is that a woman is necessary for this ritual, simply because it is easier, according to this tradition, to awaken the Kundalini movement through a woman, so to speak. So this way, and I don't know, do you have any specific questions? Because I'm open to specific questions. And then this energy, as Kundalini moves through a woman's body and explodes in first heart chakra and her head chakra, it's actually, it already, from my experience, started to spill on my partner when it opened up in my heart chakra. And he started to feel it. And actually, I was like, I had an aura around me. I was like a, light bulb. And then it spilled when I went to my head, it spilled over him. And we were actually in a kind of very peaceful ecstasy, but it was an ecstatic experience. Now, if you have a question about like the doings of it, which I actually have it in my book, it is, they do not say the doings of it. Basically, it does very often. It can happen either through oral sex or through the intercourse, and it doesn't matter whether you withhold sperm or not in this tradition, because in Taoist traditions they say, but they do it for different reasons. They do it for preservation of life energy. Here, in this tradition, they are not interested in preserving life energy. They are interested in having an ecstatic experience of cosmic consciousness. Does it answer your question?
Yes, it goes a little deeper. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Joanna. Been wonderful. We have time for one more question if somebody would like to ask Joanna a question about this fascinating area. Leo Jacobis put some stuff in the chat here, more of a comment than a question. One more question. Who's got one more question?
Well, it was a lot. So, and I said, there is more, but we don't have time, so because I have a few more points. So I want to, about Mary Magdalene, initiating Jesus. Yes, there are some theories like that, because there are some theories which actually come also from Egypt, that Mary Magdalene was an initiate from the Isis temple. So where there was the initiation of Jesus to sexual mysteries, and when they were meant to do it. And interestingly enough, there are some there's some evidence from visions of a Catholic nun. I think her name was Anne Mary Emmerich, if I remember correctly, 18th century nun, who said it as well. There are some theories that Mary Magdalene was half Jewish, half Egyptian, and that sound quite legitimate, and so on. But I would love to elaborate on this, but there is no time. So yes, so there is definitely tradition like that as well.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Joanna. Great to have you with us again. Thank you for all that very rich sharing. We hope to see you again, and all the best with the book and the continuing scholarship. Thanks for being with us in World Unity Week.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.